Good morning. The Secretariat would like to remind members of the following mitigation measures that are in place for this meeting. All delegates are required to wear a face covering at all times whilst in public spaces and in the General Assembly Hall, except when directly addressing the meeting. All staff are also required to wear face coverings at all times. Disposable face masks are available if needed. All delegates are to refrain from direct contact, including handshakes and other physical contact during greetings in recognition of the physical distancing requirements. All delegates should remain conscious of COVID-19 hand sanitizing and contact precautions. All movements and, if necessary, queuing require 2 meters physical distancing, and delegates are requested to minimize activities until seated in the meeting room. Statements are to be made from the national seats. With the assistance of the Occupational Safety and Health...
Something, Sasha Mlakar here from Slovenia.
Yes,
Can you hear
hello
me?
Sasha,
Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
I didn't find where can I turn the camera on when I need it, because it doesn't work. Usually it does, but here...
Yeah, it's at the bottom. You see your microphone.
Start video.
Start video, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
But, may I just check the quality of sound and video? Is it okay?
Yes, we hear you very well. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we will appreciate if all the panelists can keep their camera on, but unless you are a panelist, so please keep your camera on and your microphone off. And then the co-chair, when they call you, you can unmute your microphone. Thank you. I think we will start soon. We are still waiting for Mr. Edwin, Ambassador. We are still waiting for Mr. Edwin, and then we will start.
Jó napot, László.
So, Ambassador, we are just waiting for Mr. Edwin.
Is Mr. Edwin with us?
This meeting is being recorded.
He's joining soon, and then we can start, I think.
Ambassador Access, I was just reminded, twice, but I'm hoping he's coming now.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sorry, who is László?
No, this is Don Watson. I lost audio I wasn't able to talk for 10 minutes. So I don't know what's going on with my connection.
We hear you and see you.
But we hear you now very clearly.
Okay, so it's working again. Okay.
Sometimes it's just the settings in the WebEx. So you can all keep your microphone muted. Yes, that's perfect.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are in the world. Shall we start? Is Mr. Edwin with us?
Ambassador, we are still waiting for Mr. Edwin. So maybe Eric. Hello, Eric.
Yes, Ambassador. I reminded, but no response yet.
So it's 10 o'clock, Eric. Do we start? I think we should start, and hopefully he will join. Ambassador can start.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
No, why don't we start? And when Mr. Edwin arrives, you will give me a sign, and then I know that he's with us. Okay?
Okay. I think we can start. Let's just make sure our colleagues.
In 2 minutes, because make sure all interpreters are ready and just check the service are ready. Now, then we can start. Can you call our attention of our service provider? Remote interpreter are ready.
I think everyone is ready, Eric. So we will just make sure with Anthony. Anthony, can we start? Hello, Anthony. Anthony, do you hear us?
Good morning, Amin. This is Marco. You can start.
Okay, so we just want to make sure because it's also live. So thank you, Ambassador. We can start. Thank you.
So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Katalin Bogyay. I am Hungary's ambassador, permanent representative here in the United Nations. And I'm in my capacity as vice chair of the conference. I'm very happy to vice chair, bring this morning. I hope that my co-chair will arrive as well, Mr. Edwin Osundwa of Sense International from Kenya. I will be given a sign when he will join us. But it's really great to see you all. It's like a family gathering in a way. Hungary has been serving in this conference and the committee for a long time, and it's wonderful to see everybody. And thank you for the sign interpreters, and thank you for the speakers and participants in advance. So, Excellencies, dear speakers, dear member states, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you all here this morning from New York. Together with Mr. Edwin Osundwa, we will facilitate this roundtable discussion on the important issue of disability and business, realizing the right to work in open, inclusive, and accessible environments for persons with disabilities. This meeting is held using remote simultaneous interpretation. I kindly ask participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. In light of this, the meeting will end promptly at its scheduled end time at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And from practice, I would like to say, please, everybody speak in a normal speed. If you speak too too quickly, the interpreters cannot follow you. Ladies and gentlemen, in the world of work, the relationship between disability and business is complex and still needs to be fully understood. Although there is a lack of internationally comparable official statistics on persons with disabilities in the sphere of work and business, there is sufficient evidence to reveal the existence of gaps that impede the realization of the right to work for persons with disabilities. The current global normative framework provides a comprehensive guidance to address the issues concerning disability and business, especially ways to promote open, inclusive, and accessible environments for realizing the right to work. Under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is now legally binding 182 states parties, the primary obligation lies with states parties to implement its provisions. The Convention also refers both directly and indirectly to the private sector, including business, in a number of provisions that are of particular relevance. For example, according to the Convention, states have a wide range of obligations and responsibilities with regard to promoting the rights of persons with disabilities through legislative, administrative, financial, taxation, and other measures that interact with and have an impact on stakeholders of the private sector, including businesses. The Convention also recognizes the important role played by business and other private sector stakeholders in promoting accessibility and universal design throughout business development and delivery. Business enterprises can become socially responsible enablers of the advancement of the rights of persons with disabilities in community and society. Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, while inequalities and discrimination remain significant barriers to the participation of persons with disabilities in society, new opportunities also emerge to promote the right to work in more open, inclusive, and accessible environments, which can benefit both persons with disabilities and businesses. Examples of such legislative and policy tools include those related to finance, taxation, public procurement, and affirmative action, where feasible, to regulate the market and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. Effective policies and measures are needed in order to combat discrimination and to create an enabling environment that is open, inclusive, and accessible for persons with disabilities for their meaningful participation and inclusion at work. In response to the current global challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic, the UN Secretary General issued in May a policy brief on disability-inclusive response to COVID-19, highlighting the impact of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities and outlining recommendations to make the response and recovery inclusive of persons with disabilities. The brief was broadly supported by member states. We will have the opportunity to discuss some emerging and practices in place for engaging and including persons with disabilities in workplace and businesses in the context of the current response to and recovery from COVID-19. Now, dear colleagues, I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished panelists. We have today, for the roundtable discussion with us, Ms. Phyllis Choo, Director of Planning, Community Integration and Development at XG Enable, Singapore. Mr. Alejandra Consuelo León Rodríguez, Director of the Productivity Pact Program, Colombia. Mr. Yuval Wagner, founder and president of Access Israel. Ms. Caroline Casey, Ashoka Fellow and Young Global Leader of the World Economic Forum. Mr. László Lovászy, member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, who is leading a working group on CRPD R27 on work and employment. And Mr. Don Watson, who is currently Vice President in Merck and represents Merck as a member of the steering committee of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. Welcome to all the speakers. Thank you for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, to have a focused and interactive discussion, I would kindly invite each of the panelists to make an initial presentation for 7 minutes. You can use the question and answer panel in the WebEx platform for asking questions from the panelists, dear colleagues. Questions, comments will be addressed by the panelists at the Q&A section of the roundtable. After the presentations, we will invite delegations and other observers to join a follow-up interactive discussion with panel members who will respond to questions and comments from the floor. In that segment of about an hour, there will be opportunities for delegations, UN entities, and national human rights institutions to pose specific questions to panelists or to make brief comments that are relevant to the discussion of the roundtable, not longer than in 3 minutes. Accredited NGOs who have, prior to the conference, submitted their request to speak will also be invited to take the floor during the dialogue. All participants of the interactive segment are kindly requested to only take the floor when invited to speak. So mute your microphones all the time, please. Participants wishing to take the floor are invited to inscribe via the dedicated speaker request form, and I will open the floor for questions and comments later. The link to the speaker's form is available in the chat board of the WebEx Interprofile platform. However, the form will only be open for registration when the chair opens the floor for comments. Until then, the form will be closed. When you are given the floor, please unmute yourself and indicate your name, followed by your delegation, organization before posing your question. So as I said, please note the interventions shall be strictly limited to no longer than 3 minutes. I will stop everybody. Now, let me turn to our distinguished panelists. Please note that when making your oral presentations and engaging in the interactive discussion, you are invited to address one or more of the following questions. What are the major barriers and challenges that prevent governments and the business sector from advancing the rights of persons with disabilities in the workplace? 2, what are some concrete examples of businesses that have been successful in fulfilling their responsibilities to respect and protect the rights of persons with disabilities in the workplace and businesses? 3, what are some concrete examples of existing policy tools that have proved to be effective in motivating companies to ensure that they provide an open, inclusive, and accessible environment in which persons with disabilities can work or do business? 4, in response to the COVID-19 crisis and its ongoing health concerns in the workplace, many public institutions and private sector companies have adopted telecommuting as a viable method for meeting with requirements at work. What can be further facilitated to support the rights of workers with disabilities during COVID-19 time? How can the right to work be exercised by all persons with disabilities, including those in the most marginalized situations, such as women with disabilities and persons with intellectual or social disabilities? And finally, Article 32 of the Convention calls for international cooperation, and Goal 17 for multi-stakeholder partnerships. How can greater progress be made in this regard to better support the capacities of states and disability stakeholders in improving accessible and inclusive working environments for persons with disabilities? A lot to talk about this morning. And if I'm lucky and I see Mr. Edwin Osundwa with us, I see him on the screen, so welcome. He's from Sense International and from Kenya. He will be moderating this panel discussion with the speakers. Don't forget you have 7 minutes. And I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Osundwa. Welcome. It's very good to see you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am happy to be the co-chair for this roundtable discussion. I am here with my assistant who will support me, so she'll gladly help me read out some of the bios of the panel members. At this juncture, I would like to invite Phyllis Choo to make her presentation, and she'll kindly stick to 7 minutes. Madam Phyllis Choo. This is her bio.
Hello. Choo, the Director of Planning, Community Integration and Development at SG Enable Singapore. SG Enable Singapore is an agency in Singapore dedicated to enhancing employability and employment options for persons with disabilities. It builds employers' capabilities to train, hire, and integrate persons with disabilities to the labor market through advisory and consultancy services, disability management workshops and training, job shadowing and mentorship programs, and online resources. It also helps employers identify areas of improvement to become more inclusive and provides job placement and job support services.
Thank you. Now, Madam Phyllis, the floor is yours.
Ambassador, Mr. Osundwa, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, good morning and a quick thank you to the organizers for this timely roundtable discussion. Singapore is committed to the goals and aspirations set out in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Over the years, our country has taken steps to ensure that persons with disabilities have progressively greater access to opportunities for employment and to participate as integral and contributing members of society. In this regard, SG Enable, which is a key partner to the Singapore government in administering disability services, works closely with the Ministries of Social and Family Development as well as Manpower to promote employment for persons with disabilities. Recognize that employment is not just about earning an income, though that's very, very important. It's also about empowering persons with disabilities to be socially connected and to be able to exercise their talents and achieve their life goals. Successfully placing and sustaining persons with disabilities in employment requires a thoughtful and multifaceted approach, with the public, private, and non-profit sectors working in concert. Singapore recognizes that jobs-oriented vocational training and school-to-work transition support for youth and with disabilities are key to enabling the full enjoyment of the right to work. Special education, or SPED schools, have for decades been preparing students for working life. In fact, the Ministry of Education, working with SPED schools, developed the framework for vocational education in 2010 to deepen and broaden vocational education and improve the employability of SPED students. In addition, students with special needs in both mainstream and SPED schools, including those with intellectual disabilities and autism, have the opportunity to participate in transition to work programs that give them real-world work exposure. For example, SPED students can take part in the School to Work program, which includes a structured program of up to 2 years that provides training and authentic work experiences with the opportunity for job placement after that. SPED schools also, on their own initiative, tap local networks to provide students with work experience programs and internships. Other transition programs like the IHL internship program and RISE mentorship program, which is a collaborative effort with the Singapore Business Network on Disability, help tertiary educated young people with disabilities gain work experience, a better understanding of their skills and abilities, and to build a professional networks. On the other hand, we recognize that it is insufficient to focus solely on persons with disabilities. Without employers who are willing and able to employ and sustain persons with disabilities in the workplace, there can be no realization of the right to work. The Singapore government, therefore, has put in place public programs and fiscal supports to promote employment of persons with disabilities. For example, from 2021, employers hiring Singaporeans with disabilities who earn less than US $2,900 a month will automatically receive wage offsets of up to US $198 per month per employee. And under the Open Door program, employers can receive funding to defray the cost of making reasonable workplace accommodations, and also to provide training for employees so that they can build up their confidence when working with colleagues with disabilities. Policy measures aside, we recognize that employers quite often lack understanding of the competence and skills of persons with disabilities, or they have internalized negative messages around disabilities. And they also lack the confidence to create inclusive workplaces. With regard to this, SG Enable runs a suite of programs aimed at building the capabilities of employers in disability inclusive hiring, ranging from bite-sized disability awareness workshops to a series of 6 sessions targeting HR professionals. And just 2 months ago, we were very pleased to launch the Enabling Mark with the support of the Singapore Business Federation Foundation. This mark is a national level accreditation framework for disability inclusive hiring, and basically it benchmarks employers for their hiring practices and outcomes and enables them to improve through structured interventions. A first of its kind in Singapore, this mark underlines the commitment of the business community to inclusive employment. Encouraging examples of inclusive hiring can be found among local and multinational companies, employers large and small, in diverse sectors. In 2019, a record 111 organizations and individuals were honored for inclusive employment at the Enabling Employers Award, which was an increase of 50% over the previous edition in 2017. Now, measures such as these are especially important now, as Singapore has not been spared from the economic fallout of COVID-19. Our economy has contracted and the resident unemployment rate has increased from 3.3% in March 2020 to 4.7% in September 2020. In response, the National Jobs Council has spearheaded the national effort to bring together jobs and skills training opportunities. About US $740 million have been set aside under the Jobs Growth Incentive to provide wage offsets to encourage employers to bring forward hiring and create jobs for locals. Now, recognizing the vulnerability of persons with disabilities in such a labor market, the Singapore government has provided higher wage offsets under this scheme for newly hired employees with disabilities to sustain their inclusion in the workplace. And through the Job Redesign Grant, we are subsidizing the cost of equipping the homes of employees with disabilities so that they can telecommute comfortably. So as we work towards building back better, Singapore remains committed to promoting inclusive workplaces and increasing the participation of persons with disabilities in the workplace.
I'm
We have
sorry
made
to
significant
say,
progress.
I'm sorry to say you have 30 seconds left. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes, we have made significant progress over the years, but of course, as usual, much more remains to be done. And with that, I thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Ms. Choo, for that very wonderful presentation. I would now like to invite Ms. Alexandra to give us her presentation, but before that, I'll read out a little bit about her.
Alejandra Consuelo León Rodríguez. Alexandra has had 30 years of professional experience in public and private entities, as well as in management or advisory positions of organizations of persons with disabilities at an international and national level. She has participated in the design, management, and control of projects and programs related to persons with disabilities, especially in matters of human rights, legislation, accessibility, and labor inclusion. In the last 11 years, she has managed the Productivity Pact program, which built in a participatory way a territorial model of labor inclusion for persons with disabilities in Colombia.
And welcome, Madam Rodríguez.
Muy buen día para todos.
The floor is
Tomé
yours,
la
Madam
pregunta
Representative.
relacionada.
A very good morning. When it comes to Article 32 of the Convention and SDG 17 on alliances, I would like to state the following by way of answering the question that is relevant in that regard, that is to say, how can states make further progress to include persons with disabilities? I will answer that question by in two ways. First of all, by looking at how we have achieved inclusion in our countries and how that can make further progress, and secondly, by focusing on what we have done in Colombia, because we think this can be an inspiration for other countries. In terms of what has to be borne in mind to enhance international cooperation, I would like to mention three issues. First of all, the major challenge in this regard is to look at the best initiatives to include persons with disabilities when it comes to the labour market, to see what the best possible opportunities are for the most vulnerable and to ensure that they include persons with disabilities. Secondly, in these international cooperation projects, there needs to be fora for discussion and decision-making between governments, organizations representing persons with disabilities, and the private sector. Unfortunately, this is very often not the case. This is very often lacking in international cooperation. Very often we see that there is information being shared, but there isn't really a development of what is truly useful. Thirdly, we need to ensure that we can really understand the best way of including persons with disabilities in the labour market, so that we can really build up capacity, and so that we can implement the necessary activities and provide technical advice where necessary. I would like to speak to you now about the programme to include persons with disabilities, which can be used in the domain of international cooperation. This was a programme that began in 2009 and was facilitated by the Development Bank in our region, and we also worked with the private sector in this endeavour. There was one clear goal in mind when the initiative began. That is to say, to work together to build up a framework for inclusion in the labour market, to ensure that the needs of the business sector were also in line with the needs of persons with disabilities, to pinpoint the problems relating to inclusion in the labour market, for instance, the lack of training and advice provided to businesses, the simple lack of understanding within the corporate world about how best to harness the knowledge of persons with disabilities, and the lack of development of these good practices. This was a participatory process. We believe that this initiative can be replicated as a good practice throughout the world. At the very beginning, the initiative involved all key stakeholders. That includes local authorities, training services, job agencies, businesses. The starting point was the local progress that had been made, the progress made at a local level, and then we tried to build on that. We then tried to build up permanent fora for discussion. We tried to facilitate consensus on how we could visualize inclusion in the labour market so as to build up the necessary quality standards in this domain. We tried to foster complementarity between the different important areas, and most importantly, we bore in mind the institutional structures that already existed in the country for all citizens. In other words, we tried to avoid duplication, to simply build parallel frameworks. We tried to avoid that approach. We also tried to make sure that this could be sustainable over time. Today, indeed, this program is now set in stone, is permanent in its nature. We tried to make sure that this program could ensure the provision of appropriate services for persons with disabilities, and this includes the provision of necessary training, both for persons with disabilities and for companies. Over the last 6 years, through the Productivity Pact, we have been able to build up capacity within the various ministries who are involved in rolling out with this project. For instance, the Ministry of Labour, or the Administrative Unit for the Civil Service, for instance. They have been involved in rolling out this program, and this is how we have seen significant progress made. This has allowed these bodies to develop specific policies to build on their successes. This program that we have built up has also been replicated by other countries. We are seeing it, for instance, replicated in Chile and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rodriguez. It's now my pleasure to welcome Mr. Yuval Wagner, and here is his brief bio.
Mr. Wagner established Access Israel over 20 years ago after a helicopter accident that left him wheelchair-bound. Mr. Wagner had an immense impact on accessibility developments in Israel and has extensive knowledge on the current accessibility issues in Israel and around the world. Mr. Wagner developed an award-winning model for implementing accessibility in large organizations. Access Israel and Mr. Wagner at its forefront is working continuously to promote and implement the UN's SDG in regard of accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities.
Welcome, Mr. Wagner.
Thank you very much. For those who can't or are vision disabilities, I'm a bald man, age 55, and wearing a blue shirt and speaking for my study in my office in Israel. Before I begin, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak at such an important event. It is truly an honor to be here with you. The convention recognizes the right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others. The convention recognizes the equal right to work in the environment that is open, inclusive, and accessible to persons with disabilities. State parties are called upon to promote the employment of persons with disabilities in the private sector through appropriate policies and measures. The 2030 Agenda constitutes a global development agenda for inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development. In 2030 Agenda, member states pledged to leave no one behind. In Israel, the legislation for employment of people with disabilities requires every private company with more than 100 employees to employ at least 3% employees with disabilities in an accessible and inclusive working environment. In recent years, there has been a steady increase in the number of people with disabilities that are employed. Today, the employment rate for people with disabilities is 60%, and the employment rate for people with severe disabilities is 47%. This is a significant improvement, as employment rates among these groups stood at just 32% in 2011. However, there is still a considerable gap in the employment between people with disabilities and people without disabilities, as the employment rate among people without disabilities stands at 79%. There are key barriers and challenges on the journey to full equality and employment of people with disabilities and their true inclusion in the labor market, such as the awareness of the potential of employing people with disabilities, the accessibility of the built environment, accessible transportation, accessible workplaces, accessible ICT to information and communication technology, training for HR recruitment staff, awareness of accessibility training for all employees, awareness by people with disabilities of possible job openings, and more. Dealing with these barriers is very important to improve the employment of people with disabilities. But I believe that in order to reach the true goal of full accessible and inclusive employment, we have to make sure that the decision makers of an organization truly understand and believe the employment of people with disabilities is very important investment for the company and the right business decision to make. In order to achieve this, our methods of implementation should be through awareness, research, best practices, training, round table, and providing management, support staff, and fellow co-workers with tools and understanding on how to create an accessible environment. A manager that believes in this mission will make it happen. We at Access Israel are true believers of awareness, but a special kind of awareness. We believe the awareness should be made by people with disabilities themselves. We believe that the manager, decision makers, and all employees of an organization must experience themselves what it means to feel and to be with disability, with all kinds of disabilities. We create experiential activities that simulate the challenges that people with disabilities face. We learned that when people understand what it feels like to have a disability, they understand the importance of creating an accessible and inclusive environment. To achieve full inclusive employment, it is important that accessibility is provided at all stages. On the recruitment of employment, this means that the available job should be published in an accessible form, that HR knows how to go through a CV of a potential employee with disability, and that their organization offers an accessible and inclusive physical and social environment. To give you one quick example, a bank employed a person with a hearing disability and was very proud of it, but very quickly problems came up and the manager complained that this employee with disability often didn't do the task correctly. We intervened and to help out and learn the problems that was the manager was chewing gum. The problem was that the manager was chewing gum often, which made it difficult for the employee to read his lips and understand what his instructions. This is just a quick example that shows the importance of accessibility in all steps of employment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the lockdowns, for the first time, everyone in the country and actually in the world feels what people with disabilities feel.
Could you please wrap it up, sir? Could you please? Thank you.
So the pandemic showed the amazing potential of technology to enable the employment of people with disabilities. But it also raised some new barriers and challenges such as internet availability, computer and software availability, accessible working environment, digital orientation, accessibility of virtual meetings and technologies used, accessibility of software and internally by organization, accessibility in local languages. So we call all managers to private businesses to truly learn and understand the business's potential of employing people with disabilities and then take action and make it happen. And final remarks, Access Israel became a special advisor to the CRPD, and we are proud to be a part of an amazing global accessibility community. We are here to share our experience in the last 20 years, learning from you and sharing with others best practices to make sure to leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Edwin, the floor is yours again. Edwin, are you with us?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Wagner. Sorry, I was on mute. It's now my pleasure to invite Miss Caroline, and I will briefly read her bio.
Yes, Miss Caroline Casey. Miss Casey from Ireland is an award-winning social entrepreneur and founder of the Valuable 500. Ms. Casey committed to building a global movement on inclusive business for the 1.3 billion people in the world with a disability. Over the past 2 decades, she has set up several organizations and initiatives centered on disability business inclusion. Our latest initiative, the Valuable 500, is a campaign to get 500 businesses to commit to put disability inclusion on their leadership agendas. Launched at the World Economic Forum Annual Summit in 2019, Casey succeeded in bringing disability inclusion onto the main stage at Davos for the first time ever, with the support of global business leaders.
Thanks, Ms. Caroline. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who are visually impaired like myself, a little description. I am blonde, a white female from Dublin with round black glasses that make me look like Edna from The Incredibles. Look, we all know the scale of the disability inequality crisis cannot be resolved without disability, a business at its centre. It is too large for governments and charities and conventions alone. It needs the most powerful force on our planet. We believe, as we all do, that inclusive business creates inclusive societies. However, disability has been on the edges and the sidelines of business for always. The startling fact is 90% of our companies claim to be passionate about diversity and inclusion, and only 4% consider disability. In my mind, that is an inclusion delusion. And that has to be changed. And why is that so, when nearly every one of our lives at some point will be touched by disability? And over 1.3 billion people today have a lived experience of disability. And with a mother and a father, that is 73% of our global population and consumer population. The barriers for business to date, we believe, have been threefold. One is the competing and siloed diversity and inclusion agenda in business. When we categorize humanity into pockets which compete against each other for a finite resource. Gender against disability, disability against LGBTQ, and so on. In this fight, disability has always been on the sidelines. The second barrier is truly a lack of understanding about the value this community and their families bring to business, and they need the innovation, the insight, the brand differentiation, the market offering. This is not fully understood, the return on investment. But most critically, the barrier is lack of senior and business and CEO leadership. 54% of our leaders have never had a conversation of disability, business inclusion. How can we change anything without their support? We have seen business leadership in moving the dial before on other issues, and we need it now. Leaders make choices, and those choices create cultures. In the shadow and in light of a leader, the attention of the leader is required, and the intention. Leaders are humans too, and so we need to open up this offering to them. We need leaders to see what's happening in our businesses so we can scale and integrate the solutions that already exist in many companies around the world. And we certainly need them for system change. And that's what we need, not to solve the symptoms of a broken system. We need to absolutely shake up the business system. And that's why the Valuable 500 was created. It was created because it needed to find the missing piece, these leaders, to radically transform our business system through business leadership and opportunity. And we believe not one leader could do it, but we needed a collective mass. And so the Valuable 500 began as a campaign to find 500 of the world's most intentional and committed leaders for the long journey for change. And what they had to do was very simply commit to having leadership conversations and actions about disability inclusion and communicating those internally in the business and publicly. It began as a campaign, but let me tell you where we are now. My voice is going to shake because before coming on this call, we signed up our 364th company. We are the fastest growing CEO leadership community in the world on any issue after the UN Global Compact, who I don't mind taking second stage on. And these organizations now will move from a community to a collective that will drive system change. This system change framework, which we will be launching in January of next year, was co-designed with our already robust community and community of people with disabilities, our wonderful disability inclusion partners across the world, and big global institutions. We are looking to do nothing but completely shake it up through leadership, culture, brands, and most importantly around reporting, representation, research and data. This is the time, the decade of disruption. This breakdown is a breakthrough. What we need to do is come together collectively and collaboratively. At the core of the Valuable 500 collective community and this transformational change program are four things that we urge all of us to remember. One, we are committed to intersectionality. No one of us is defined by one label. We want to interweave all of the parts of humanity into our business, leaving no one behind, not choosing one over the other. There is no hierarchy for inclusion or exclusion. Number two, integration. There is no point having standards of excellence which are only to one cohort of human beings. We insist upon disability inclusion being integrated and infused into the business, taking accessibility from niche to normal, universal design as a way that we must do business. Thirdly, interdependency. If we are looking to employ people with disabilities, we must connect it to the other functions of the business, to the value of the intelligence of that market and consumer base. This is about supply chain and using the powers of that. We also need to remember intergenerational, the young generation coming up who demand inclusion at every level. We need to work on the multiplier effect of many, and we need to collaborate. Today, as I stand here, we have the power of 13 million employees around the world, 4.5 trillion in revenue, 31 countries in 56 sectors, and we're only at 364. On the end of January, we close our community with our 500. As I close, that sounds very visionary. And how do we make it practical? Well, let me just give you 3 examples of valuable 500 companies. Microsoft just announced 3 weeks ago, 6.1% of its employee base have identified as having a disability. We have the valued truth. 80% is invisible. The second piece, Salesforce. They just appointed their chief accessibility officer reporting to the board across all global functions in the business. And third, a smaller one, M&S, very simply look how they can serve their consumers. If you have an invisible disability, you go into their store, they give you a sunflower lanyard, and you can be better served. I close by saying this. It's very simple. This is not rocket science. We know how to change this. We need to do this with collaboration, and we need to do this with a new way forward. This is the disruptor decade. The rule book for diversity and inclusion is being completely thrown out. And it is exciting and challenging. But our call to business is no more excuses. Disability is your business too.
Edwin, do you hear us?
Thank you so much, Ms. Caroline. Now moving on to our next presenter, Mr. László, and here is his brief bio.
Mr. László Lovászy, to address this meeting, Mr. Lovászy is a member of the CRPD committee since 2012. He was representative of the Committee on Rehabilitation and Integration of People with Disabilities at the Council of Europe. He worked on disability-related dossier and projects at the Hungarian government and became the first disabled advisor to a member of the European Parliament. In 2009, Mr. Lovászy has extensive knowledge and publications on economics, law, and labor market, and specifically on the changing world of work, ICT, robotics, and artificial intelligence with a disability perspective. He is leading a working group on CRPD Article 27 and was lecturer and rapporteur at the ILO conference, which was marked Making the Future of Work Inclusive of Persons with Disabilities in 2019. He's lecturer at several universities of Hungary.
Please, you are most welcome, Mr. Lovászy.
We don't hear you, László. No, you have to unmute yourself.
Hello, Mr. László.
You have to unmute yourself, László.
Can you?
Sorry, colleagues from BCSS, can you unmute László? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, dear Madam Ambassador, dear Mr. Chairman, my fellow colleagues, dear participants. 13 years after the convention was introduced, we have realized that entire new solutions are coming out that no one could ever have dreamed of, even 10 or 5 years ago. The coronavirus pandemic also triggered new trends and solutions. Many businesses not only restructured their operations, but realized new paths for innovations and productivity based on technology. It means that technology and science have been developing at a previously unprecedented speed. Practically, it looks as if there are no boundaries on the horizon at all. By borrowing the notion of Raymond Kurzweil, who wrote about the technological singularity we are going to face, these innovations and inventions will perform 20,000 years worth of human-level intellectual work week after week. Generally speaking, it means a leap in human evolution in terms of dependence on enhanced technology and science. I believe the possibility itself of the current accelerated process of vaccines production indicates this leap. However, in many cases, the current existing solutions are not available for persons with disabilities. As the COVID-19 pandemic shows, if the world is forced to focus on certain and deadly challenges instead of years or decades, the most advanced companies and businesses, in cooperation with national states and agencies, can indeed product life-saving solutions and tools within months in health sector. When it comes to the notion of rehabilitation as well as reasonable accommodation, I believe that the new world may come in which everybody can have fully individualized as well as adapted environment based on the flexibility of technology already available. This flexibility can also cover at least two areas: new forms of employment and the transformation of current workplaces as well as universal design. Based on the development of these areas, we can also rely on the perspectives of quality education in accordance with our general comment on inclusive education, dealing with the issue of available ambient and assistive technology, as well as early recognition and development of pupils' needs. In case of changing our system and accessibility of education and workplaces, we can involve more persons with disabilities in new emerging sectors as well. Diversity is the key element of this approach. Diversity is not only for or among persons with disabilities, but also for persons without disabilities. The solutions for persons with disabilities can also be useful for persons without disabilities in terms of productivity. The productivity could be a key driver for fighting demographic challenges and aging together with economic recovery after COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of assistive technologies, We have to think about the evolution of wearable devices, intelligent and smart tools, invasive devices like cochlear implants and endoskeletons. Whilst these items and tools could all be an everyday issue and experience in the so-called Industry 4.0, we also have to scrutinize certain aspects relevant to privacy, accessibility, interoperability, as well as affordability in terms of business. Otherwise, persons with disabilities could be excluded in the long run. At this point, in light of interoperability and conformity, we have to emphasize that the state parties and agencies may have an obligation to make sure customers can have access to those products and services without interference problems at their workplaces and education institutions. Even though you can name these technologies as health issues and part of rehabilitation, my concern is that these technologies also raise particular aspects such as the integrity of persons, liability, as well as responsibility for decisions. When it comes to the competitiveness and employment in business sector, we also have to identify the weak points of technology in terms of ethical issues and fairness at social level. At the same time, we have to reinforce that the convention is about ensuring free choices and not forcing persons with disabilities to adapt to only one solution against their preferences. To move on, some words about UNCRPD. The convention is about dignity, diversity, and human rights. As the convention states, we have to make more efforts in terms of research and innovations. However, I'm always of the opinion that at the same time, we also have to change the value of freedom, competition, and diversity. We cannot forget those with special, even extreme needs either. What's more, in the future, everybody might be somehow disabled in one way or another in comparison to intelligent and smart software and services. I'm talking about a kind of evolution of the concept of disability itself. Finally, let's talk about general comments as tools for understanding the evolution of disabilities. The UN Committee has adopted a few general comments so far. These are about equal recognition before the law, accessibility, rights of women and girls with disabilities, and inclusive education, to name the most important ones in terms of today's topic. Now, hopefully, by the end of the next year, the committee can adopt a new general comment on employment and labor market. For closure, here is a testimony I always make. The convention is not about maintaining a right to remain disabled, but about ensuring choices and chances. It is our turn today to strengthen the cooperation among governments and stakeholders by seizing the opportunity to learn more about what the future has to offer. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. László. Now it's my pleasure to invite our final panelist, Don Watson, and here is his bio.
Mr. Watson is the Vice President for Global Workplace and Enterprise Services at Merck. He represents Merck on the steering committee of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, and is executive sponsor for Merck's Capability Network, employee business group focused on creating an empowering environment for persons with disabilities. Mr. Watson
James, I just wanted to mention
supported and driven supplier initiatives to advocate for
is actually
disability-owned business. In 2019, Mr. Watson was awarded Employee/Business Resource Group Executive Sponsor of the Year by the organization Disability, IN, for driving a global organization to encourage, inspire, and advance disability inclusion around the world.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner, for yours.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time. For more than 125 years, Merck, known as MSD outside of the US and Canada, has been inventing for life, bringing forward medicines and vaccines for many of the world's most challenging diseases in pursuit of our mission to save and improve lives. Our patients are diverse and inclusive of one of the largest global underserved populations, people with disabilities. In 2015, Merck created the Global Disability Inclusion Council, a cross-functional group of leaders who embarked on a 5-year disability inclusion strategy to improve in areas such as information technology, facilities, health and benefits, population health, talent acquisition, labor relations, supplier diversity, and branding. This journey enabled us to sign the International Labor Organization Global Business and Disability Network Charter in 2018, a major milestone in our journey. This relationship enabled us to make connections and work with national business and disability networks across the globe. And on Monday, November 30th, we supported the Global Business and Disability Network Declaration, reaffirming corporate commitment to disability inclusion, especially during this great impact of the global pandemic that is currently hitting us all. We have worked closely with Disability In to promote the full inclusion of people with disabilities, to inspire accessible innovation for all, and to foster cultures of inclusion. In 2019 and 2020, we scored a 100 on the Disability Equality Index, and in 2020, we were named Corporation of the Year. In 2019, we were proud to join the Valuable 500. As one of now 364 member companies, we are helping create the tipping point for change and unlocking the social and economic value of over 1.3 billion people living with apparent and non-apparent disabilities across the world. Diversity and inclusion are the reason we are able to deliver on our promise to invent for life. We foster a workforce where employees feel comfortable bringing their unique perspectives to work, creating a sense of belonging. We embrace the power of employee resource groups as a business imperative. Approximately 10% of our global employee base participate in 10 ERGs. They unleash the powerful potential of our employees by playing a role in business strategy and setting the example of diversity and inclusion as a core value of our culture. Specifically, the Merck Capability Network offers a forum to colleagues with disabilities and their allies. There are 20 chapters across the globe with 627 members, and we had 16% member increase in 2020. These members are corporate ambassadors at both internal and external events and are supporting things like the education of the company community through events with groups like Art Lifting and Purple Light Up, as well as implementation of universal design across our global facilities. Talent acquisition through support with college outreach programs and strategic partnerships with companies such as Best Buddies and Getting Hired. And they also support the community through sponsorship of programs for things we've done with the New Jersey Milburn Paper Mill Playhouse on autism-friendly events and creating disability inclusion programs during Bring Your Child to Work Day. In the workplace, we have embraced the 7 principles of universal design, a process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and safety, and social participation by removing barriers. We have embedded these principles in our engineering design standards with the emphasis on making the design flexible, intuitive, and safe for all. We educate our engineers, architectural and design firms, and construction partners so they can embrace and deliver our universal design strategy. Facilities that are founded upon universal design principles will differentiate companies in the marketplace while creating a work environment where everyone can bring their full self to work and thrive. Economic inclusion and supplier diversity is the epicenter of Merck's diverse and inclusive procurement practices. We create economic opportunities for underrepresented communities by procuring products and services from minority, women, veteran, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and disability-owned enterprises. Within the disability-owned business community, we serve on the advisory board of the Disability and Disability Equality Index. We co-chair the Disability and Procurement Council and participate in mentoring programs, providing us an opportunity to coach and develop suppliers, not only to do business with Merck, but with other Fortune 500 companies. Because the potential of over 1.3 billion people living with apparent and non-apparent disabilities should not be ignored, going forward, we are committed to leveraging best-in-class and next-generation digital accessible technology to enhance our employee, patient, and consumer experience, furthering the implementation of universal design and facility accessibility standards to benefit not only people with disabilities, but also all employees working at our facilities around the world. We will continue engaging with employees in workplace mental health awareness to reduce the stigma and to improve mental health best practices to improve the lives of our employees and their families. We will continue utilizing recruiting and promotional processes to reduce unconscious bias and structural barriers in the hiring and retention of people with disabilities, and leverage direct hiring and indirect hiring and supplier diversity engagements to broaden the feeder pool of talent. Through our partnerships with the International Labor Organization, as well as the Valuable 500 and others, we will continue to identify and promote other best practices that support our employees to confidently self-ID and bring their full self to work and thrive. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all for the questions. Now, on that hand, Ambassador, of the.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Thank you very much for the panelists.
Ambassador.
Thank you. So, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as you know, we start now the interactive dialogue. We want to be very practical and very successful. For that, you will have some time to ask questions and make some comments. Please go to the Google form, which is available in the chat box of the WebEx and Interprefy event platform. And the floor is open now for inscriptions. All interested delegations and accredited observers from the UN entities, national human rights institutions are able to inscribe now to speak. So please go to this platform and ask for the floor. In a moment, on a first-come, first-served basis, I will call and give the floor to the speakers who have inscribed. And meanwhile, we will keep open the form for a while. So now, first, I would like to tell everybody you have 3 minutes, please. You will be muted because we also would like to give back the floor to the panelists later on. So please don't speak more than 3 minutes. First, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Justin Tomlinson, Minister for Disabled People from the United Kingdom. Your Excellency, if you are with us, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Minister of State Justin Tomlinson, MP, UK Delegation. Distinguished delegates, I'm delighted to take part in this very important roundtable discussion. And allow me to begin by talking about the UK's approach to addressing these challenges. The UK is committed to implementing the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities through strong policies and legislation that combat discrimination against disabled people. To strengthen this further, the UK is developing a national strategy for disabled people, which aims to ensure that all disabled people can play a full role in society. The strategy, personally backed by the Prime Minister, is a cross-government exercise to embed disability awareness into policy development, remove barriers, create opportunity, and deliver a fully inclusive society. We are proud to have delivered record disability employment of 4.3 million, up 1.4 million since 2013 alone. Despite the unprecedented challenge of COVID-19, we remain every bit as ambitious with our goal of 1 million more disabled people in work over the decade to 2027. To do this, we are going further than the Equality Act 2010, which imposes a duty on employers and providers of goods and services to make reasonable adjustments to ensure disabled people enjoy the same rights and opportunities as others do. The UK government is supporting disabled people and their employers to both find work and remain in work. More and more employers are recognising the value that a more inclusive and diverse workforce that reflects society can bring to their business. Our Disability Confidence Scheme now has record numbers of businesses engaging with it. The scheme provides employers with what they need to attract, recruit, retain and develop disabled people in the workplace. This is done through sharing expert advice, business-to-business workshops, useful toolkits, resources, videos, events and webinars. This is combined with our personalised and tailored employment support programmes and our Access to Work scheme that funds up to approximately $80,000 per employee to provide support, adjustments and technology to make the workplace more accessible. We are focused on making sure that employers have the confidence, knowledge and skills they need for an increasingly diverse and inclusive workforce. And finally, I'm greatly encouraged by the contributions. The biggest ask of disabled people, especially young disabled people, is to have an opportunity to showcase their ability. We need to give businesses and employers the confidence for inclusive recruitment and retention, which is a real win-win. And that has been so well articulated by the panel members today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I invite the Honourable Carla Quattro, Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion of Canada. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and thank you to the panelists. Your presentations were wonderful. As Canada's Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, and as a person with a disability myself, I'm very pleased to join you for this discussion. In Canada and all over the world, persons with disabilities have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many whose employment was precarious to begin with found themselves at higher risk of job losses. The way we work has changed, bringing additional barriers. I was proud that Canada was one of 138 United Nations member states and observer signatories to the international statement committing to a disability-inclusive response to COVID-19. Since the outset of the pandemic, the Government of Canada has taken a disability-inclusive approach to our pandemic response, guiding its work with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We created the COVID-19 Disability Advisory Group, comprised of national leaders in disability rights and inclusion, to provide real-time, on-the-ground advice on the lived pandemic experience. This group provided input into policy and economic response and fundamentally changed the way Canada responds to a crisis. We took targeted actions for Canadians with disabilities, including a one-time payment to address the extraordinary expenses being incurred. It also included $15 million to add a new national workplace accessibility stream to our existing Opportunities Fund for persons with disabilities. This new stream of funding is specifically to provide resources to improve workplace accessibility, including accessible work-from-home measures, online training, and access to jobs for Canadians with disabilities in response to COVID-19. We also invested in projects through our Accessible Technology Program, helping to break down barriers in the technology and digital spaces. To address systemic gaps, we've recently committed to develop Canada's first ever Disability Inclusion Action Plan that will include a new disability benefit, a better process to determine eligibility for government disability programs and benefits, and a robust employment strategy for Canadians with disabilities. We're going to focus this employment strategy on both workers and employers while investing in skills training and championing the business case for disability inclusion. Our strategy will be an important component of our broader Government of Canada Economic Recovery Plan. Madam Chair, Canada's commitment to the Convention has never been stronger, and as employment continues to be an important barrier to inclusion, the Government of Canada will continue its ongoing work to close the gap. We are eager to engage our international partners in further dialogue and collaboration to ensure that persons with disabilities have opportunities to make valuable contributions to society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I give now the floor to Matthias Leicht Miranda from Switzerland. Are you with us?
Yes, hello.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Actually, I don't want to comment a lot. I thank you all the speakers. I'm responsible in Switzerland for a special program on inclusive workplace environment from the Federal Bureau of Equality for People with Disabilities. We work with many different stakeholders. We have piloted different ways to motivate the businesses to actually have inclusive workplace environments, and with quite some success. But what we have difficulties in general is with the inclusion of people with mental health issues, especially from employer side, that many employers are very happy to work on their inclusive workplace environment. But they say, yeah, we'll need flexible people. We need people that can manage under stress. We are happy to work with people that use wheelchair, for example, or to provide accessibility for any other disability. But many employers actually have quite reticence in working with people with mental health issues. And we are looking inside Switzerland, but hopefully in this platform as well, outside internationally, for best practices in this regard, how to accommodate people with mental health issues, what is needed to change in the workplace environment to best achieve this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. And dear colleagues, in order to make our discussion to be more inclusive, and we decided at the CRPD Bureau that after every three state parties, we will invite one NGO, UN or National Human Rights Institution to take the floor, and then we continue with the member states. So according to this decision, first I would like to invite Ms. Shrutilata Singh of Sense International from India, and I would like to give you the floor. Yes, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I am grateful to have this opportunity today to be able to intervene. And I will repeat what someone had just said. That this COVID pandemic has made everyone feel and seen what person with disability feel. Like they want to go somewhere and do something, but they simply cannot. There has been remarkable improvement in employment sector of disabled people, but those with communication issues are still not visible in global. Those with similar communication issues like deafblind people. And UN bodies should start noticing and start involving us deafblind people in planning too. Through Sense India, we have been trying to support other deafblind children and their families through our income generation activities. And over the years, we have realized that it is very important to have support from family and community also. Being a woman with deafblindness, I feel much more vulnerable because there is a big concern of safety along with accessibility. This needs to be addressed. No matter how much well-educated or well-skilled we are, there is always a big chance of getting rejected. It looks like this world is still not ready to accept us. We should be included in everything. And there needs to be a plan of employment in an informal environment. Working in an unfamiliar environment is not just so safe for us. And so I would appreciate if all speakers can share some moral program for including deaf-blind people for employment sector, so that we can work with support from community and family. This environment should be familiar, and this employment should be safer and accessible. This program model should be like this. This big concern, safety along with accessibility, I repeat that it needs to be addressed. And many people with severe disability, like deafblind, are still not able to go out and work. So I repeat my question to panelists and all speakers. If they have any moral program to support the deafblind children around the world, we need to be included everywhere. We do not need to be invisible. It is no wonder that our country has not counted us, only because we are still invisible globally. And thank you very much once again for giving me opportunity.
Thank you very much for your question and for your intervention. Now I give the floor to Mr. Esteban Trommel from ILO. Mr. Trommel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. As the International Labour Organization, we have been promoting for many years the employment of persons with disabilities. And one of our flagship programs is the work with, of course, with the private sector. And you have heard about the ILO Global Business Disability Network from the panelist, Don Watson, who sits on our steering committee. And he has also mentioned the conference we had just a few days ago, where the private sector was reaffirming its commitment to disability inclusion in the current context. We heard about national business and disability networks from Chile, Mexico, Philippines, Indonesia, even in the current context, increasing their attention to disability inclusion. Just a few days ago, the Kenyan Business and Disability Network was launched. And later this week, the Indian Business and Disability Network will adopt a compendium on good practices of companies in the current context. We did, a few months ago, a survey among national networks on business and disability and its members. And not surprisingly, there was a huge concern about the impact of the crisis. They were insisting that they continue to be committed. They were sharing with us some of the good practices, but at the same time, they were also highlighting that they need more support from governments, not only to ensure that more people with disabilities gain employment, but also that people with disabilities that have currently their jobs, these jobs are being retained. And I think more efforts need to be made by countries to support that. I think public procurement, for instance, is a tool that can be quite easily used also in the current context of budget constraints. One of the issues that you wanted to address in this session is the intersectionality. I think it's an issue that also was highly mentioned, often mentioned at our meeting yesterday. And we just did a few days ago a very interesting webinar on the intersectionality between Black Lives Matter and persons with disabilities, with Afro-American speakers with disabilities sharing their direct lived experiences on what this concept means. I would really highly recommend all of you to watch that webinar. It is saved on our website. With that, I give back the floor to you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Mr. Trommel. And now I turn to the member states, and I see Russia, Mr. Maxim Biryukov, who asked for the floor. Yes, not an easy name. Okay, the floor is yours.
Добрый день, благодарю.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. At present, federal bodies and the executives in the constituent entities of the Russian Federation are implementing the plan to increase the level of employment for persons with disabilities for the period 2017 to 2020. One of the main achievements was that even during the pandemic, employment among persons with disabilities was preserved. Given that this plan is coming to an end this year, a plan of action to increase employment for persons with disabilities for the period 2021-2024 has been produced. The new plan includes actions to develop and apply now relevant remote forms of work for employment agencies and resource and training centres for the training of persons with disabilities and other health restrictions, to support job placement for graduates from vocational and higher educational training programs, taking into account targeted training, including pre-diploma work placements for persons with disabilities in a training-focused organisation. The document also includes efforts to engage in detailed monitoring of employment of persons with disabilities, taking into account the sphere, the sector, the age of the employees, and the level of their salary. These measures will allow for an objective analysis of the employment of persons with disabilities, including public sector workers and young people who are entering the jobs market for the first time. Given that there are ever greater professional and qualification requirements for workers when looking for a job, and the ubiquitous transition to the digital format, workers with disabilities often find themselves being less competitive on the modern jobs market, and for them to adapt to the changing conditions, additional measures are needed. As part of the plan to implement the concept to support volunteering up to the period 2025, the relevant Russian agency, the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection, conducted an analysis of volunteer organisations and their work when it comes to supporting the employment of persons with disabilities. Following this work, based on national and international experience, the Ministry produced a compendium of good practices for volunteer organisations in the sphere of providing employment services to persons with disabilities, based on the employment agency in the constituent entities of the Russian Federation. This compendium is designed to provide assistance to job seekers with disabilities, employers, experts in state agencies working in employment, social protection, education, medical and social assessments, and disabled persons organisations when it comes to supporting persons with disabilities during and after their job search. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. I now give the floor to Esma Gumberidze from Georgia. Esma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Your Excellency. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to add that I'm not only Georgia's youth representative to the United Nations, but also I have a disability myself, namely I'm a person with blindness. Therefore, I'm pretty active in the disability rights field back home and receive a lot of inquiries from persons with disabilities, especially the younger persons with disabilities, who are asking me how can they find a job and how can they transition better from study to work period. I would share all the opinions expressed by the expert from Israel regarding the importance of introducing quotas in the employment sphere, both of public and private sector. People with disabilities, unfortunately, until today, even those with higher education, those who know more than one language, are still not on an equal footing with others in terms of employment and access to employment. We have faced a history of mass unemployment, of segregated working places, and different sheltered workshops and institutions. Therefore, to balance these inequalities and compensate, it is very important to introduce state positive measures, including tax reliefs or some mandatory quotas for the employment. As we know, Stephen Hawking was physically fully paralyzed. Helen Keller was a lecturer at the university, though she was deafblind. All of these and opportunities for these two people were possible because they were given services and assistive devices that they needed, a technology that they needed. This is why it is essential for us to have standards and adapt all the environments, including the web accessibility, internal working portals, websites, and other information resources, and make them universally accessible for everyone. No matter do we have currently employees with disabilities or consumers of disabilities, or we don't think we do. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I invite Mr. Frederick Schröder of the World Blind Union. I give the floor, Mr. Schröder.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. One of the things that leapt out at me during today's presentations is how many different strategies are needed to achieve the full and equal employment of people with disabilities. As I thought about the various presentations, I thought if children with disabilities are to grow up and be participants in the workplace, they need access to a good education. As they prepare for employment, they need access to assistive technology. Workplaces need to be accessible. Employers need to believe that people with disabilities can contribute. The one thing that I'd like to add or highlight is the need for people with disabilities themselves to feel part of the community of people with disabilities, to feel empowered, to be part of a movement. In other words, if a person with a disability is to work, that individual must first believe that he or she can work and work competitively. I congratulate all of you. If there's time for responses, Caroline Casey, I really admire the work you've done, and I would be interested in knowing in your work with these companies, have they identified any particular barriers internally that they've encountered as they try to stimulate disability employment? And then related to that, have there been any resources, strategies that they've identified or that others have identified to address those barriers? Congratulations, and thank you again for including us.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the representative of Morocco, Maida Muchu.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. We're happy we could have such an important and inclusive conference despite the challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our big thanks go to DESA and all the organizers, as well as the panelists and the participants whose viewpoints on the different items of this conference will be of utmost importance, we are sure. Madam Chair, this panel on disability and business is one of the core questions, reflects on one of the core questions raised by CRPD. Thank you for the panelists. Your presentations were inclusive and informative. I would like to make few comments on this same subject. Throughout the years, there has been significant improvement as persons with disabilities and their inclusion in the workplace have been included to the business agenda. Indeed, disability inclusion now features major policies and is fast gaining momentum in business strategies despite differences in geographical locations and industrial sectors. Article 27 of CRPD recognizes the rights of persons with disabilities to work on equal basis, the right to the opportunity to gain a living by work freely chosen or accepted in a labor market and work environment that is open, inclusive, and accessible to persons with disabilities. However, this is far from being fully achieved. People with disabilities meet and overcome massive challenges on a daily basis, which says a lot about the challenges they can overcome in the workplace. The pandemic has made things much more difficult. including persons with disabilities and accommodating their disability-related needs are important moves for employers in terms of compliance with national legislation and in terms of showing their responsibility in this regard. Moreover, the inclusion of persons with disabilities is a must for competitive businesses today. Being physically challenged or having other forms of disability should not mean being disqualified from workplace or from the mainstream of society as a whole. Some of the encouraging ways to promote an inclusive environment is that the companies themselves explicitly and openly indicate their intention to become inclusive. This simple message helps to transcend the message to the entire company and thus contribute to the overall awareness in society. Finally, just 2 sentences. Making workplaces inclusive of people with disabilities should be business as usual. Their inclusion is business unusual. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I will give the floor to the representatives to Iran, followed by Turkey, for 1.5 minutes each. That's it, because then I would like to give back the floor to the panelists as well. So Iran, Mohammed Zarayan, the floor is yours. 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. According to Article 15 of the Law on the Protection of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran is obliged to allocate at least 30% of employment permits to government and public agencies to persons with disabilities. The welfare organization provides loans to people with disabilities to start their own businesses and also support businesses of persons with disability by launching or supporting exhibitions. However, the United States unilateral coercive measures have negatively affected the quality of services and made life difficult for people with disabilities. Even the provision of medicines needed by patients and rehabilitation equipment for the disabled is subject to inflation and problems with banking transactions caused by U.S. unilateral coercive measures. The impact of the U.S. unilateral coercive measures had a devastating effect on companies and cooperatives with disabilities, depriving them of their right to livelihood and the continued employment of people with disabilities. Impeding the business owned by persons with disabilities by UCM led to the generation of a unique social value in the world and to the extension of a human value in the field of confidence in the effectiveness of the disabled. Continuation of U.S. sanctions policies on the livelihood of people, especially disabled persons, and disregard for the human needs and the priorities of this issue preserve the right to complain in international forums and human rights agencies these policies for disabilities. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. It was good to see you again. And now I give the floor to Turkey. Tayyar Kuz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. As we all know, in all over the world, benefiting from the education and employment opportunities and getting the supports needed are basic prerequisites for a life worthy of human dignity and reaching the goal of inclusive development. With this point of view, we made important legal regulations and practices in our country. Despite some difficulties in practice, significant developments have been experienced in the employment of persons with disabilities in open, inclusive, and accessible environments through some good practices in recent years. In this framework, in addition to the quota levy scheme that are regulated by the labor law, state personal law, and the relevant secondary legislation recently, supported employment and self-employment methods have gained importance as good practices. Within the scope of supported employment, with the understanding that every individual can participate in working life a pilot project was carried out on job coaching implementation in cooperation with the private sector between 2014 and 17. By this project, sustainable employment of nearly 900 people with disabilities were provided in 6 provinces in the open labor market. With the aim of encouraging entrepreneurship, people with disabilities completing entrepreneurship training program are supported financially to start their own businesses. This support is financed by a fund consisting of fines collected from employers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, if we want really to hear our colleagues, we have to be very careful from now on. Yeah. I would like really to give the chance to everybody just to say very shortly, to send a message, 1 minute each. Algeria followed by Slovenia. Algeria, please.
Excellency, my delegation strongly believes that effective policies and robust measures are important in order to combat discrimination and to create enabling environments that are open, inclusive, and accessible for persons with disabilities for their meaningful participation and inclusion at work. Algeria works to facilitate the access of persons with disabilities to the labor market and accompany them in their career. Article 27 of our law 0902 stipulates that every employee must allocate at least 1% of work positions for persons with disabilities recognized as worker. In this context of improving the social participation of independence of persons with disabilities, the National Agency of Microcredit manages funded the projects of 1,522 disabled young entrepreneurs. I have one question. Technology can be valuable for persons with disabilities. How can the state parties integrate this parameter in their strategy to help them access to suitable job? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia, followed by Malaysia. Slovenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Slovenia fulfills general condition to ensure rights of persons with disabilities with the adoption of Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment of Disability Persons Act. Regulates the right to vocational rehabilitation and certain employment-related issues of persons with disability. Additionally, the Act lays down other forms, measures, and initiatives regarding the employment of persons with disabilities and the method of financing. The purpose of this Act is to improve the employability of persons with disability and to establish conditions for their equivalent participation in the labor market by eliminating barriers and creating equal opportunities. This Act enables efficient employment of disabled workers even in times of crisis, such as economic recession in the past, as well as the current COVID situation. With particularities as quota system, it can identify the effectiveness at the provision of information and raising awareness among employers with regarding to work integration of persons with disability status, as well as the gradual growth of the number of employees, persons with disability. We emphasize the importance and the establishing nature of these effects, particularly during times of crisis. The number of subsidies employment is increasing every year, and employers are increasing better informed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And finally, I give the floor to the representative of Malaysia. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. For Malaysia, older persons with disabilities enjoy the same rights and privileges as any other persons with disabilities in terms of access to services provided by the government. In terms of employment, the Ministry of Human Resources Malaysia is preparing a national human resource blueprint in which there are specific programs to address persons with disabilities as part of the workforce. Malaysia's National Council of Persons for Disabilities and the National Advisory of Consultative Council for Older Persons are major platforms in evaluating and monitoring policies and programs for both persons with disabilities and older persons in the workforce. I do have one question for the panelists. We've heard a lot of what governments do and NGOs do, but we believe that there are a lot of examples or best practices that we can learn from employers as we are talking about persons with disabilities in employment. What are their thoughts and ideas in creating a platform, or what is the best ways to get more information of the sharing of best practices and knowledge from employers? Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We have to finish exactly at 12 o'clock. So what I'm going to do now, I would like to ask all the panelists just to wrap it up in 1.5 minutes each, so that we could give the floor to everybody for a reaction and wrapping up. First, I would like to start with Ms. Phyllis Choo. Phyllis Choo, 1.5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all the participants for the very insightful comments and the sharing. Participants spoke about the importance of businesses in driving disability inclusion, and it's very true that leaders set the tone. In Singapore, we have the Singapore Business Network on Disability, which is actually an organic gathering of businesses who promote the equitable inclusion of persons with disabilities in employment. So while we fully appreciate the importance of robust policies and measures in promoting disability inclusion, the importance of corporate values and culture cannot be understated. And we think this is something that all of us need to look closely at. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Ms. Alejandra Consuelo León Rodríguez. 1.5 minutes.
If we really want to improve the inclusion of persons with disabilities in our countries, we need to work, first of all, to ensure that there is appropriate training provided to all citizens in line with the dynamics of the labour market. We won't ensure that we actually do achieve inclusion unless we work across the board in education and training and advice to provide the necessary technical training to people. Secondly, it's crucial that the appropriate support be provided to businesses, both in the public and the private sector, because very often businesses don't know how to achieve inclusion. That is why it's so important to work with them, to provide advice to them in how they can implement reasonable adjustments to their businesses to ensure that they can tap into this human potential. In this way, companies would have the appropriate policies in place to ensure inclusion and would do so as a result of their own conviction and not because they're obliged to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. And now I give the floor to Ms. Yuval Wagner in Israel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Congratulations to Delia Fatoussi to be elected to the CRPD today, and also congratulations to the Valuable 500 for the 364 companies. And I want to say that it's great to hear and learn of all this work and best practices, and it's amazing on one hand. But on the other hand, we have to understand that we have to do a lot more on our journey for the inclusion and employment of people with disabilities. And I truly believe that the way is what I said. It's a lot of awareness, and especially making sure managers understand it, truly believe in it, and making understand that it's a business case. And as I said, a manager that believes in this mission will make it happen. And I also want to say that legislation is very helpful, that what we see in Israel, with a stick to make it happen. And the leadership of the business community is amazing. So I hope we can continue working together on this important mission, sharing and learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I move now to Caroline Casey. The floor is yours. Caroline.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Your warmth was wonderful. To remind us, in case we think this is too hard, the sustainability agenda began in a financial global crisis. It is now the normal way to do business, and we cannot have sustainability without inclusion, and we cannot have inclusion without people with disabilities. There are 3 ways we can do this. Collective strength. I'm so proud that nearly every country has valuable 500 companies. Joining together, we can do this. Second is collaboration. And Fred, we have Access Israel, ILO, GBD, and we have partners all around the world that we did not do this on our own. We need to leverage each other's success and collaborate. And lastly, it's about accountability and it's about will. And I'm going to finish by saying Paul Pullman, who is the godfather of sustainability, who is our chairperson, said, the only reason companies don't do this is they don't care. It's will and intention.
Brilliant, Caroline. Thank you so much. And now I give the floor to my compatriot, great László Lovászy. It has been an honor to working with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I have only 3 short closing remarks. To begin by referring back to my introduction, remember, the employment of persons with disabilities will be a priority in aging societies. That is why we in the committee have been working on a new general comment on employment. Second, training and vocational education will also be important assets for persons with disabilities in emerging sectors of the labor market, with special regards to online courses and education based on accessible platforms and tools. Finally, although we haven't touched upon this issue, when it comes to artificial intelligence and more businesses want to develop algorithms for increasing their productivity, the selection and the promotion of persons with disabilities working in the open labor market will also be crucial issues in terms of artificial intelligence. And at the same time, relevant safeguards must be developed against the discrimination of persons with disabilities, especially in case of discriminatory algorithms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, László. I give the floor to Don Watson, please.
Thank you very much. So I would just close by saying that this really requires a partnership between government, business, non-government organizations, not-for-profits, and for those who are looking to really start small and grow. I'm not an expert in here on this topic. I learn, I ask for help, because as you heard today, there are lots of resources to help you start your journey. I talked earlier about universal design in my presentation, and we asked for a lot of help on that, and we're not done on that journey of learning and growing. This must be a priority. Disability impacts all of us regardless of race, gender, country, sexual orientation. So by working together, we all can really create the change that we've discussed today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to give back the floor just for a second to Mr. Osundwa. Are you with us? It has been an honor to co-chair with you. Yes, final words.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you so much to all distinguished panelists and all who took part. It's been a very exciting opportunity for us to co-chair this, and most importantly, very insightful discussions which will take us forward towards realizing all these rights to business and employment for persons with disabilities. Thank you so much.
Can you put... Do you mind putting a little bit bigger
okay, thank you very much, your colleagues, your excellencies, dear colleagues, panelists. It has been a great moment. It has been uplifting and inspiring, and you have made your presentation so very important. And it has been an honor for me to serve as the vice chair of this conference. And I wish you all the very best. I wanted to give the floor to everybody, so I'm not saying anything at the end, except I'm thanking DESA. I'm thanking the card service provider. And I would like to say, whoever would like to send a longer speech or version, can do that with the as statements at un.org. It has been a great morning. Conference is really going well. I wish you all the very best. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.